If you are there and can see me, would you please post a comment? Drush is there. Joanne is there. All right, we'll try it again. I'm glad you're here. We're going to take a look at Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 19. And here's what that says. On the following day, that is the day after Palm Sunday, when they came from Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Jesus said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. So the fig tree. The fig tree is one of Mark's devices that he uses to help us interpret the stories. One story is connected to the other. The fig tree will be connected to the story of the temple. Just leave it there for the moment. We'll come back and get it once again. Now, just a warning. Many of us, too many of us, were raised with subtle and not so subtle messages of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic instruction, especially when it comes to the passion narratives. Lots of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic thought was in the sermons and the lessons we heard as children and young people. We need to both acknowledge the lessons and then do everything we can to eradicate them from our thinking and believing. So let's go into the temple. Many of us were taught that Jesus entered the temple because of the practice of blood sacrifice and a corrupt priesthood or the temple rituals themselves. This is part of the anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic thought we have received in the past. Animal sacrifice, though perhaps repugnant to our modern ears and thinking, was common, even commanded in Torah. People in the past, and up to and including the present, grew up in close proximity to animals and they knew where the meat came from. We have so removed ourselves from the food production system that we think meat magically appears in the grocery store. Long before animal sacrifice, people knew that the best way of creating, maintaining, and restoring good relations with another was the gift of a meal. So how do you maintain, create, restore a relationship with a divine being? You offer food to God by killing and burning the offering on the altar. Borg and Crossan, Marcus Borg, John Dominic Crossan, whose book The Last Week I highly commend to you, and I'm grateful for their work on which this entire week of study is based. Borg and Crossan tell us, in sacrifice as meal, the animal was transferred to God by having its blood poured over the altar and then returned to the offerer as divine food for a feast with God. In other words, the offerer did not so much invite God to a meal as God invited the offerer to a meal. In sacrifice, the animal is set apart as sacred and given to God as a sacred gift or returned to the offerer as an invitation to a meal. The sense of sacrifice should never be confused with either suffering or substitution. Offerers never thought that the point of the sacrifice was to make the animal suffer, or that the greatest sacrifice was one in which the animal suffered terribly for a prolonged period of time. Offerers never thought that the animal was dying in their place, that they deserved to be killed for their sins, but that God would accept the slain offering as a substitutionary atonement or a vicarious substitution. That was never part of the thinking. And it shouldn't be part of our thinking either. It's simply bad theology. There is no reason to believe that Jesus' actions in the temple were caused by any rejection of blood sacrifice or anything to do with sacrifice at all. So let's consider the priesthood. We need to consider the nature of the priesthood in Jesus' time, not the priests of today in the Roman Catholic Church or Jewish rabbis or any of those other lessons we were taught along the way. This is history, way back. While the priesthood was limited to a certain number of families by Jesus' time, basically 4 families, the high priest had become an office to which the Roman governor had the power of appointment. So the governor could use the natural tensions that existed between those 4 families to divide and conquer. Caiaphas was the high priest from 18 to 36 in the Common Era, 18 years, in a time when the typical term was 4. Pilate was governor from 26 to 36. We must assume that they worked pretty well together. When Pilate was recalled to Rome, the people deposed Caiaphas. So who did the high priest work for? Did he work for Rome? Or did he work for God? He could stand before the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement on the part of the people. But who did he work for on the other 364 days of the year? Perhaps there's a case to be made for the separation of church and state after all. And then there's the trouble at the temple. What Crossan and Borg call the ambiguity of the people to the religious leaders spilled over to the temple. The building was both the house of God and the institutional and symbolic seat of submission to Rome. The people loved the temple, and they supported it through temple taxes and participation in the pilgrim festivals. They were willing to die for the integrity of the temple. When Caligula planned to install a statue of himself depicted as Zeus in the temple, thousands of unarmed Jews were willing to die rather than see it happen. When Herod rebuilt the temple, he placed a large golden eagle, a symbol of Rome and its patron god Jupiter, atop one of the temple gates. 2 Jewish leaders instructed their students to chop it down. 40 of the students were arrested and burnt alive. Was the temple the house of God or the house of Jupiter? Again, the lessons we were not taught was the political dynamic that was in play throughout this whole week. If you go back just a few hundred years to the time of Jeremiah, we need to be reminded of what Jeremiah said about the temple and his understanding of it. Jeremiah takes the people to task because they believe that the worship of God excuses them from divine judgment. Jeremiah's accusation is, "For if you truly amend your ways and your doings, if you truly act justly one with another, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will dwell with you in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your ancestors forever and ever." And then just a few verses later, Jeremiah asks a question. "Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight?" The phrase den of robbers becomes very clear. The people's injustice makes them robbers, and they think that the temple and their worship is their security. The temple is not the place where the robbery occurs, but it's the place where the robbers go for refuge. The prophet's call to do justice is well documented throughout all the prophetic books. There is no substituting worship for doing justice. So Jesus arrives in the temple, and he has an action and a teaching. The action has 4 parts. He begins by driving out the buyers and the sellers. He overturns the tables of the money changers. He overturns the seats of the dove sellers. He would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. Now, all of those activities were perfectly legitimate and legal in the temple. The temple relied on them. What Jesus was doing was not cleansing the temple, but symbolically shutting it down. It is a symbolic destruction of the temple. And that's where we have to go back to the fig tree. The temple is symbolically destroyed, mirroring the fig tree's fate. We must keep word and action together. The temple has become a safe place, a hiding place for those who do injustice, but wrap themselves in the religious practice of worship. There is nothing wrong with prayer and sacrifice. They are commanded in Torah. But God is a God of justice and righteousness. And when worship substitutes for justice, God rejects God's temple. Or for us, God rejects the church today. As Jesus condemned the fig tree for bearing no fruit, Jesus condemns those who do not bear the fruit of justice for their barrenness. If you got a question or two, put it on the screen here and I'll see what I can do. Okay, we're going to post this, so if you want to go back and watch it again, you can. Or maybe you'll invite some others to watch it with you and we can begin to expand the circle. We'll get together tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock and consider what happened on Tuesday of Holy Week. Until then, stay in, stay well, and save lives.
That's a great sign off.